Okay, so home insurance. It's something everyone's talking about,
That's
right?
definitely a hot topic lately.
Premiums going up, up, up. But is it really that bad? Like, is it all it's cracked up to be? Or is it just media hype?
Yeah, good question.
Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're going to try to separate fact from, fiction.
Yeah.
And we've got some data from USA Facts to help us out. And let me tell you, some of this stuff is pretty eye-opening.
Oh, yeah.
When you start digging into this, it's kind of strange how little information is out there about how much we're all actually spending on property insurance. Makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, why is that such a secret?
Exactly. And that's why we're really digging deep on this one today.
It's interesting because even though there's not a lot of publicly available data on what consumers are spending, on their end, the actual industry, the property and casualty insurance industry, they've been struggling.
Really?
Yeah. The Office of Financial Research, they say that this industry has been operating at a loss almost every year since 2017. Yeah. And that's not a good sign, not exactly a recipe for a stable market.
Okay, so it's not just some kind of marketing ploy to get us to pay more. These insurance companies, they're genuinely hurting.
Seems that way.
But how does that translate to us? When we try to actually get insurance, what are we seeing because of this?
Think of it this way. When an entire industry is struggling, it impacts, well, two major things:
Yeah,
how affordable their products are and how easy it is to actually find those products.
makes sense.
And we're seeing this firsthand in home insurance. It's getting harder to find affordable options, and in some cases, people can't even get coverage at all.
And the article, it mentions that even Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is concerned about this, which I gotta say, it's not every day you hear the Treasury Department talking about home insurance. So what's that all about?
Well, it's significant because it means that the federal government is starting to recognize this as a serious issue. The fact that the Treasury Department's actually partnering with state insurance regulators to investigate tells us that they're taking it very, very seriously.
Yeah.
This isn't just a blip on the radar. This is something much bigger, potentially some systemic problems there.
Wow. And of course, the article points to natural disasters as, a major reason these costs are rising,
Of course.
which, I mean, it makes sense, right? We're
Right.
seeing these extreme weather events all the time, more than ever, it seems, and they're causing more damage than ever before.
Right. And we have the data to back that up. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they've shown that the average cost of major natural disasters, like your hurricanes, floods, wildfires,
Yeah.
it's higher in the last decade than any other decade that we have on record.
This is unbelievable.
It's a lot. And that increased cost, well, that gets passed along.
To us.
Exactly.
In the form of higher premiums. So imagine, your insurance going up not just a little bit year after year, but consistently faster than inflation.
Ouch.
That's what a lot of homeowners are dealing with right now.
It's a tough reality.
The National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, they're a prime example.
Hmm.
Premiums there, they've been skyrocketing 12% every year.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the premiums either. As the risk of these disasters, these natural disasters, increase, insurance companies, they're facing a very difficult choice.
Oh, yeah.
Raise premiums even higher to cover the potential payouts or
Or what?
just pull out, just completely avoid high-risk areas entirely.
So it's not even just about affording the insurance, it's about being able to get it at all in the first place.
Exactly.
So what happens if you live in one of those areas that insurers have basically redlined?
Right. It's a scary thought. And we're already seeing it happen.
Yeah.
The article highlights California, where major insurers are starting to back off because the risk of wildfires and earthquakes is just too high.
Makes sense, I guess, from their perspective.
Right. And then there's Florida, where so many private insurers have actually gone bankrupt because of all the hurricanes.
Oh, wow.
They've had to create their own insurance option. The state did. The Citizens Property Insurance Corporation.
Okay.
Just to make sure people can get some kind of coverage.
Which, by the way, Congress is now investigating to see if it's even solvent. They're worried about its ability to actually pay out if a big one hits.
Yeah.
So even the government-run options aren't a sure thing.
Exactly. And that's why this congressional investigation is so significant.
Yeah.
It highlights just how severe this situation is becoming. The very real concern that these insurance programs, public and private, could just collapse
Under the weight of all this.
under the weight of these increasingly costly disasters.
Yeah. To make this even more, real for our listeners, I want to talk about this. The FEMA National Risk Index. Now, if you're watching the video version, we've got it up on screen for you.
It's pretty interesting.
But if you're listening to the audio, we'll be sure to link it in the show notes. Don't worry.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a fascinating, if a little bit terrifying, visual representation of risk all across the U.S. Basically, FEMA, they mapped out the entire country, and they assessed the risk level for all sorts of natural disasters.
And what's really fascinating about this index is it doesn't just look at how likely a natural disaster is to occur in an area, like the odds, but it also looks at how vulnerable the population is and the community's ability to actually cope with and recover from a natural disaster if it occurs.
Oh, wow.
So it's really a much more holistic picture of risk.
And some of the areas that are highlighted as high risk in the article, they're places that I think a lot of us know. Parts of Southern California, especially around the San Francisco Bay Area, because of earthquakes, wildfires.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's places like Cook County, Illinois, which is, Chicago. They're dealing with everything.
Right.
Heat waves, tornadoes, you name it.
Right.
And then there's Harris County, Texas.
Of course, home to Houston.
Exactly, Houston. Hurricanes, floods, they even get those crazy winter storms down there.
It's true.
And, well, we can't forget about South Florida.
Right. Always a hotspot for hurricanes.
Always. But here's the thing that I thought was really surprising.
What's that?
Even King County, Washington shows up as high risk.
No way.
Right,
Really?
for King County, where Seattle is.
Huh. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Because of earthquakes. And they're even talking about, like, potential volcanic activity.
Oh, wow. I forgot about Mount Rainier.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget those things are out there.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Seriously. But it's a good reminder, though, that no part of the country is completely immune to these threats from Mother Nature. And, when you really look at the numbers, it's kind of staggering how many people are living in harm's way.
Yeah, it's a little scary when you think about it.
The National Risk Index, they estimate that almost 46 million people in the U.S., that's like the entire population of California, living in counties that are categorized as very high risk.
Wow.
And then on top of that, another 26.2% are living in areas that are deemed relatively high risk.
So we're talking, what, like a third of the country?
At least.
Living in places that are likely to see some kind of major disaster?
It's a real concern.
It really does feel like we're watching this slow motion train wreck.
How so?
Well, you've got more and more people moving to these risky areas, right? Property values are still going up, up, up.
Right.
And then you've got Mother Nature on top of all that, just throwing these bigger and badder disasters our way.
Yeah. It's a recipe for trouble.
It makes you wonder, what happens if these high-risk areas, what if they just become uninsurable?
Ooh, it's a good question.
Or what if premiums just get so high that only, super rich people can afford to live there?
Yeah, it's a critical question. And it really points to a potential crisis,
Yeah.
Because as these risks increase and insurance becomes either unaffordable or completely unavailable, it could trigger all sorts of consequences.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, imagine people being forced out of their homes,
Oh.
having to abandon them, property values plummeting, and then more and more strain on government resources because they're having to respond to all these disasters more and more often.
It's kind of a scary picture.
It's not great.
But is there anything we can do about it? Or are we really just stuck watching this slow motion train wreck unfold?
Well, I don't think we're doomed just yet, but we definitely need to shift gears. Like, we can't just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome.
Right, right.
We need to be more proactive instead of reactive.
Okay, so what does that look like? A more proactive approach? I mean, where do we even begin with a problem this big?
Well, it's going to take a multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
We need to rethink things from the ground up.
Okay.
First off, building codes and zoning regulations need a serious overhaul.
Interesting.
We need to make sure that new structures, especially in these high-risk areas, are built to withstand whatever Mother Nature can throw at them.
So like thinking about hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, all of it from the very beginning.
Exactly. Building for the environment, not just ignoring it.
Makes sense.
Right.
But that brings up another issue, right? Like, what about all the houses that are already built, the ones that have been around for years and years?
Right. A lot of existing homes were built way before we understood all these risks or even had the technology to do anything about it.
Right.
And that's where retrofitting comes in. We need to be proactive about making existing structures more resilient to these disasters.
Okay, so what Like, what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, it could be a variety of things depending on the location and the specific risks.
Sure, sure.
Like reinforcing roofs to withstand those really strong winds, we're seeing more and more.
Okay.
Installing fire-resistant materials in those areas that are prone to wildfires,
Makes sense.
or even elevating homes that are in flood zones.
Right, right. Get them up out of the water. But I imagine that gets expensive. Who's footing the bill for all of this? Is this on homeowners, or is this something the government helps with?
Honestly, it's probably going to be a combination of both.
Okay.
We have seen some progress with government programs that offer financial help for this kind of retrofitting, but we definitely need to see more.
Yeah.
And, insurance companies, they have a role to play here too. They could offer discounts,
Oh, okay.
incentives for homeowners who are taking these steps, to mitigate their risk.
So it's kind of like a win-win. There's a financial incentive on both sides to get on board with the stuff, these preventative measures.
Shit.
But beyond individual houses and stuff, what about the bigger picture? I mean, are there things we can do on like a community level or even a national level to try to reduce our overall risk from these disasters?
Absolutely. We need to be investing in those large-scale mitigation efforts.
Okay, like what are we talking about there?
Things like, well, restoring wetlands. They act as natural buffers. They can help absorb floodwaters.
Oh, right. Right.
We can work on creating what they call defensible spaces around communities,
Yeah.
try to reduce the risk of wildfire spreading,
Okay.
and even just investing in better early warning systems.
Yeah, give people more time to prepare.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And this is where that bigger picture of climate change really comes into play, doesn't it? Because even if we do everything right, building codes, retrofits, all this mitigation stuff, if climate change is just going to keep fueling more and more extreme weather, aren't we just delaying the inevitable?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the elephant in the room. And we can't ignore the role of climate change in all of this. Because
Right.
even with the best mitigation efforts, we have to be ready for the fact that those risks are likely going to keep going up as the climate changes.
Which means, well, we need to be having some really tough conversations about things like managed retreat, like potentially moving people away from those areas that are most vulnerable.
It's a hard conversation to have, especially for communities who've called these places home for generations.
Right.
But as those risks and those costs continue to climb, it's a conversation we can't really avoid any longer.
It's a lot, And honestly, it can feel a little overwhelming. We're talking about changing building codes, retrofitting millions of homes, spending tons of money on mitigation projects, and then even having to consider like relocating entire communities.
It's a daunting challenge, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that we're not starting from scratch. There are already communities out there, organizations doing amazing work in this very space. We can learn from them, from their successes, their failures. And we've got the technology. We've got the resources. We can create a more resilient future.
So where does that leave us? What can we do, like as individuals, to navigate all of this? It's so complex and constantly changing.
Well, like they say, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
The more we understand about the risks that we face, both individually and as a society, the more prepared we'll be to make good decisions.
Decisions about what?
About where we choose to live, how we protect our homes, and how we advocate for change.
So if you're listening to this and you're feeling a little overwhelmed, just remember, you're not alone in this. We're all in this together, right?
We are. We're all facing this together.
Right.
And there are things we can do.
Like what?
Start by just assessing your own risk. Check out that FEMA National Risk Index we talked about. Have a chat with your insurance agent. See what's up.
Good advice.
And explore what steps you can take. What makes sense for you to mitigate your own risk and protect your home.
And don't be afraid to get involved, right?
Exactly.
Talk to your neighbors, reach out to your local officials, make your voice heard.
The more we work together, the better prepared we'll be.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If rising sea levels and those megastorms are already shaking up the insurance world, what other changes might be coming down the line as our climate continues to change? What innovations or adaptations, maybe even just like radical shifts in our thinking might we need to like really embrace to deal with all of this?
It's a question worth thinking about.
It really is. And it's one that, well, I'm sure we'll be revisiting in future deep dives. But until then, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, thanks for diving in with us.